invite my industry panelists up to the stage with me. This is, in fact, our final session, and we will get to the bottom of all things interesting. We'll even touch on AI here if we have time. We have two more wandering up. Great. So the intent here is really to hear from the industry side about how they think of innovation, unmet needs, approach to those unmet needs, et cetera. So we'll start out. I'll start closest to me. I'd let you introduce yourself, your company, and its interests in retina. What products do you have? What products are developed to a stage where we'll soon be hearing about them?
First of all, I'd say good afternoon. My name is Christopher Britton, so I'm the head of the late-stage development organization within Genentech. Thank you very much for inviting us. I think it's a
don't read the questions. That's for me.
Great pleasure.
You just answer my questions.
So obviously we have Lucentis, and we've had that for over 10 years, coming up for kind of about 13, 14 years now on the market. And we recognise there's a massive unmet need out there still, and I think we've seen that unmet need reiterated many times this afternoon. So in terms of ongoing products, we've got faricimab, which is a bispecific molecule. So here we're really talking about targeting two pathways, anti-VEGF and the angiopoietin 2 pathway. The second product which we have coming up, which is also in phase 3, is the port delivery system with ranibizumab, and you've also heard about that late this afternoon. And this product is really exciting, and you've already heard the potential. We had a median time to first refill of up to 15 months, and 80% of patients could go 6 months before that device was refilled. So those are kind of the two primary areas that we're looking at currently.
Great. Please.
Thank you, Emmett. My name is Chuck Hess. I'm Vice President and General Manager of our U.S. surgical business for Bausch Lomb. And, Bausch Lomb has a tremendous history in retina. We have innovated technology throughout the decades in not only surgical and instrumentation, capital equipment, but also in the area of pharmaceuticals, as well as ocular nutrition. So we're very embedded in this business. We're investing heavily in a lot of different categories that really are very opportune to physicians as they really encounter various disease states. Our focus in the surgical side of the business, which I'm responsible for, is really more specifically attuned to efficiency, driving new technology in the equipment space, our instrumentation, as well as really focusing on what's that next level of innovation. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that during the discussion.
Good. Angelo?
Yes, thank you. Angelo Rego. I'm the global head of Ophthalmic Diagnostics at Zeiss. I think for the sake of time, I shouldn't list off all the products we currently have in the market. It would take a long time, but obviously the general imaging products like OCT, fundus, routine diagnostic devices as well, therapeutic lasers, and most importantly, data management systems, the most popular one in the world, which has a critical topic connected to AI later.
So just at a high level, Angelo, what percentage of your portfolio is sort of imaging versus data management versus artificial intelligence analytics, say?
The lion's share is the imaging, I'd say in the 80% level. But this goes back to the monetization. We don't overvalue the data management technology because that's an enabler versus the value right? It creates value data, but you need the devices. So the trade-off for us is we don't have an exit. We're here. We've been here 170 years. We're going to be here another 170 years. So the valuation is more about the enabling, as you heard in the presentation on AI, about efficiency and effectiveness versus how are we going to make money on artificial intelligence, for instance.
I'm so happy you said that. I want to come back to it at the end because there's a difference between enabling and disrupting. And that speaks to sort of the pace of innovation in a sector and how much money flows into it. We'll come back to that. It's very relevant to the AI discussion. We'll come back to it. And you next?
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ravi Durvasula. I lead the retinal surgical instrumentation team at Alcon. Emmett, thank you for your invitation. Really a pleasure to participate on this panel today. So it's a new day at Alcon. As you know, we've spun off recently, but we're a very old company, over 70 years, and right now we work in over 70 countries worldwide and serve patients in over 140 countries. So our two complementary businesses today are really surgical and vision care. And within the surgical space, we have a large footprint in cataract, in refractive, and in vitreoretinal.
Thank you, Ravi. I'm old enough to remember when all we had was fluorescein, and virtually every meeting was surgical, dominated by surgical instrumentation, techniques, et cetera, et cetera. How big is the surgical instrumentation business unit in dollars terms?
It's roughly a half and half. I would say surgical slightly larger, but it's around 55% of our.
Do you have a number, or have you not disclosed that number?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a number, 10, 20 billion, or you haven't disclosed it?
I perhaps shouldn't disclose it
All right.
only because I
didn't
don't
mean
know
to pry. I didn't mean to
accurately
pry.
today.
Yes, I thought maybe it was in one of the public documents somewhere, but they're big.
It's around 3.5.
Right, and
3.5.
I'm sure Bausch Lomb has a big division as well. The point being that we wanted in this panel to mix drugs, diagnostics, imaging devices, and surgical instrumentation, because it sort of covers the whole panoply and have very different issues when it comes to innovation. So let's start on the drug side, if we could. Anti-VEGF agents have been hugely successful, and I hope your faricimab is hugely successful, and your port system. So major advances, mature sectors of ophthalmology. What do you view, when Genentech sits in small groups in closed doors, what do they think is the I wish we had in retinal drug development? We need to go after this. We're going to put a stake in the ground and either do it internally or externally, but what is your next moonshot?
Okay, great question. So I think for us, and then going back 5 years, because I've been at the company for 5 years, started in Roche over in Basel. For me, the reason I joined Roche and Genentech was because of geographic atrophy. You know, one of the largest areas of unmet need left in retina. So I think for me, one of the largest goals that we still have is to find a treatment for patients with geographic atrophy. And on that side, we do have 2 ongoing phase 2 studies. One mechanism of action is kind of undisclosed, but one many people will know is through Ionis, looking at a subcutaneous complement factor B injection given every month or so. So I think that's kind of one of the big areas, geographic atrophy. But I think the second kind of moonshot, and we're kind of incrementally getting there, is really about prevention. I think where we are right now, anti-VEGF treats once people have kind of already lost a lot of vision. We know we can't recover vision completely once it's already lost, whichever disease you're in, be it DME, DR, or neovascular AMD. So I think the AI algorithms and novel targets hopefully will enable us to get to a kind of a prevention strategy.
So let me just ask a follow-up, something that probably has confused many, including myself. An amazing trial, global trial run at close to $1 billion in cost, and not a whisper of a drug signal for factor D. Why is factor B going to work?
Great question. So I think fundamentally it's a large risk that we're taking. I think we accept that, number one, and that's driven by the opportunity to benefit patients. But one of the kind of the core scientific argument is that maybe complement within the eye, the complement inhibition within the eye doesn't work. We've seen the signal coming out of Apellis that maybe a different area within the complement pathway does work. And we'll hopefully, we kind of looking forward to the phase 3 results from that. But I think the fact that the complement factor B given systemically kind of targets the choroid is one of the potential scientific arguments which some of our scientists and Ionis scientists suggest could be the
So
the
just
rationale.
as a tangential aside, this is a risk that a venture capitalist would almost never take, because the pharma thinking is huge NPV, we can risk a modest amount to make that bet, because if we win enormously large, but we don't think that way. We don't want to lose at all. So it's a brave trial. Kudos to you. Let me just go down the line here and imagine I'm asking essentially the same question for either surgical instrumentation or imaging. What do you in your secret rooms talk about as I wish we had? If I could find that innovator, entrepreneur, either internally or externally, boy, I'd be all over that.
We actually wish we had a crystal ball, actually. But, I think just from our perspective, we're very interested in learning more about these new treatment modalities for us. Obviously, wet AMD and uveitis are of special interest to us. We tend to look more so from a device perspective on how do we get these treatments into the eye. And so a lot of what we've been doing is really trying to partner with other companies to develop devices that can actually facilitate implantation of stem cells or what have you. So I think for us, it's really kind of multimodality. It's really looking at what's being done outside, but also leveraging our skill sets internally to develop new products to aid in the treatment of these patients.
And how about in the OR surgical side? That's a very specialized inserter or delivery device. How about surgical instrumentation? Anything there, or is that incremental, one step at a time, as it always has been?
Well, I think we're looking for really game-changing technology, and so as we develop new surgical platforms, in fact, we continue to look at what that technology looks like. We have innovated new technology in hypersonics through our Vitesse technology that we're working on today. We continue to also look at how the operating room of the future is going to evolve, and really trying to identify and address device and technology adaptations so that they can be used more effectively and more efficiently in the OR of the future.
Ravi, I'll jump to you, and then we'll come back to Angelo because you're also surgical.
Sure. So I think we're really looking in the near term for incremental innovation, things, how we can make our systems and our instruments safer and more effective. I think in the longer term, we're certainly embarking on developing our next generation cataract and vitreoretinal platforms. We also see the need for enhanced visualization. I think MIVs have brought the clinical out and have made significant impact on positive impacts on clinical outcomes. But one of the things that in that process is that the surgeons really could benefit from seeing a lot better, a lot more. And we're also looking actively at opportunities to have more seamless integration of systems within the OR, and also integrating OR with the clinics. Right now, the practices are kind of all over the place, including surgeons at times bringing in sketches and things like that from the clinic. And so we see a lot of opportunities in both integrating and leveraging connective technologies and in further enhancing visualization. And very similarly, we're looking at opportunities both internally and externally, looking at really what is the key drivers for the surgical staff.
So a word, and either of you can respond to it. Robotics. Are we going to get to an age of fully robotic eye surgery like we do for prostate surgery? It's not fully robotic, it's driven, but is that a reality for ophthalmics?
Yeah,
what time frame?
I absolutely believe it. And I think, we saw the very first generation robotics in femtosecond lasers. I think, what we see in the future is, a combination of visualization as well as very fine computer-controlled technology to actually, and I wouldn't say replace the surgeon, but I think would enhance. And I think a lot of it has to do with the discussion on the panel just prior. These are technologies that I think we can all use and leverage to our advantage. And it really allows us to really think quite outside the box as we're approaching our patients in the operating room, leveraging these technologies together. I think I would hate to put the crystal ball on it, but I think probably within the next decade we're going to see some level of robotics involved in surgical procedures in the eye.
I feel the same way. I think at this point, it's great to have these early systems in the field. We're learning a lot in that process. But at the end of the day, I think what's really going to drive it are some of these new technologies. So I think wherever there's an opportunity for greater democratization of surgery, meaning having early stage surgeons go up the learning curve much faster. And if robotics can play a role, I think it certainly will. And I fully agree that it would be likely in the realm of telemanipulation, assisting, aiding in certain set aspects of the procedures, rather than some sort of autonomous robot that takes
Yeah,
over.
we really just don't hear enough about surgical device and in operating room device and instrumentation innovation. I always tell people that the fellows of today who finish are better surgeons than the very best in the world 20 years ago, and it's largely due to the instrumentation and tools that they now have to do the surgery. So Angelo, you are probably of a vintage where you've seen this, almost the entirety of this imaging renaissance, from fluorescein on to now multimodal imaging and the application of AI and informatics and analytics. So that you already have a lot to work with, but you can tell us your dream field if you have one.
Well, when we talk about unmet needs, and the earlier panel talked about customers, I'm going to be a half-empty guy for a second. And I said this at OIS last year. I don't know that it's recognized that healthcare systems around the world are in crisis. And let me explain why. Between 2010 and 2030, I heard 2060 today, between 2010 and 2030, the population above the age of 65 doubles. Add that to the FDA meeting in early April when they invited us all to talk about new technologies, and at the end of that meeting there was a panel that basically said on reimbursement, hey guys, it's all great you're thinking about innovation, but remember the size of the pie is not going to change. What's going to change is the size of the slice. So that just means there's going to be less money. So when we look at this and we think about the fact that the retina, not only do we have retinal diseases, but the retina is going to be the eye that allows us, with OCTA now starting, to really understand what's going on beyond the chronic eye disease. So I think when we look at this, we see two things. The commoditization of the office, where we got to drive cost out and improve efficiency, and extending the reach of the doctor so that we can enable the management of those patients with disease outside of the traditional office setting, because there's just not going to be enough time, money, or doctors to manage all of this. So is AI important? Yes, but it's enabling this process of healthcare. And you got to also think about, in the end, the doctor is still accountable for the appropriate treatment being done on that patient. And so we need to ensure that that efficacy does not get changed in the implementation of such tools.
So it sounds like it's more of a practice flow, and I want you to restate exactly again, because what you think is the issue or the unmet need or the thing you want to see solved is not just the development of a better imaging device, but the integration of it into practice in a cost-effective way?
Yes, and that's because you're going to see more and more data points, right? OCTA, the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues outside of reimbursement with OCTA, is the fact that there's just more data to look at. And you're going to see more and more instrumentation coming, and a doctor just doesn't have the time. And you've got to give him tools, him or her, tools to be able to effectively manage those patients.
So a challenging question for you. Virtually every device that goes into an ophthalmic office is $40,000 to $60,000. And that's the sweet spot. That's what doctors are willing to pay, either for something that helps them in their practice or which they can bill for. Sometimes they'll pay more. There are some more expensive devices, but that's kind of the spot. Could you see a time when the imaging companies charge meaningfully less, but sort of build their business on the other aspects, on patient flow, on analytics, on storage, and whatever else is built around that to make the doctor and patient experience better?
So since the CEO of our company is not in the room, I will tell you what I believe my answer is: absolutely. It is going to be significantly less than instrumentation costs today, and it's not that far away.
Good.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to skip a question or two here because we've covered some of them. And I want to get to sort of how you feel about external innovation. I'm going to start with the surgical people first. There was an era that I recall when there were many surgical instrumentation houses or groups that were acquired. And it seems like Grieshaber as one example, but it seems like many of them have now been acquired. I'm not sure that there are many freestanding. There are still, of course, are the individual entrepreneurs who build their instruments or have an idea and come to you. But in the drug side, we say 50% of innovation is external at most places. We'll get to Genentech, Roche, which is pretty internally focused, like Merck is historically. But what is it on surgical instrumentation? Is there much external innovation? Do you get much of it? Is it pretty rare for someone to come with a great idea? Talk about that.
So I think it isn't rare. It is something that we're actively seeking. Technology obviously is evolving so very quickly, and so what we want to do is, I think we have long embraced the fact that it shouldn't always have to be invented here. So we actively look at opportunities, and we're really agnostic to what stage they're in. And are able to evaluate on what is it by working together, by partnering, that Alcon's going to bring to the table. And so, in general, we're a very data-centric company. We want to be able to understand the results, but we realize that certain technologies are rapidly evolving, and so we're constantly on the lookout and actively look at different opportunities.
If you had to put a number to it, what % of the products that go into development are internal versus external?
I hate to hedge from that question, but it really varies year to year.
Another secret number.
Yes.
Okay. Chuck.
The interesting thing, we get a lot of our ideas from physicians. Actually, I started my career 35 years ago at a little company called Storz Instruments, and that's exactly what my role was to go out and work with physicians in their operating rooms, bring their ideas back, and execute new instrumentation. And I've worked with hundreds of physicians, produced probably over 500 new instrument designs and added them into the Storz catalog. And that's exactly the way we do things today. In fact, we're introducing a new forceps with a physician out of Arizona here at the ASRS this weekend. But, it's also the collaboration with surgeons in developing the next generation platforms. And so although we have a whole host of great engineers, they need the ideas and they need the kickstart into the innovation cycle. And so routinely we'll get our physicians, our KOLs together, physicians around the globe that help us really define what the needs are and the unmet needs globally. And that's what we try to bring into our organization is external ideas, leverage our skill set from a design, development, and a manufacturing perspective, and really bring true innovation to the marketplace.
So let me just extend that. I'm a surgeon, and I come up with an idea for a tool, an instrument that can make it easier to take some tissue off the retina or pull the iris or separate structures, whatever. It's a really cool instrument. And I know that if I go and get the IP, just in the US, it's going to cost me $20,000 to $50,000. And then if I go global, it's another. And these are not super expensive, high revenue generating things. And so I may never make as much from whatever Alcon or Bausch Lomb choose to pay me for the patent costs. So how should inventors think about taking these ideas to you? Do they have to get the IP? Do they go without the IP? Can they trust you? What should they do?
Well, most people trust me, but I would.
I don't know about that.
I would tell you, it's a very good question, and I get this question all the time. And I think ultimately, what does the device do, and how well does it perform, and what is that true unmet need, and is there anything else in that space? When I would design surgical instruments with physicians, the cost of the patent was probably in excess of probably 3 to 5 years of sales. And so it really doesn't make a lot of sense if you have a reusable device like a microsurgical instrument, a 0.12 forceps or something like that. But I think, as you look at innovative technologies, and we've seen them come from small companies and large companies like ours, it really does depend on how big the opportunity is and really how significant can this technology be to the marketplace. So my answer is it's on a case-by-case basis. What we tended to think more specifically early on is get the product into the market. Let's make a change in people's lives, and let's allow surgeons to really do what they do best, which is craft really great outcomes with their hands in our technology.
So we actively seek these types of inputs, right? And so on our website itself, there's a portal where all the inventors, whether they be surgeons or someone else, to be able to submit their ideas, and they do so in only the non-confidential information. And what we do is internally evaluate those on a case-by-case basis, and then provide some rapid feedback depending on our degree of interest, where we're then able to get into confidentiality matters and things like that.
So typically, and every deal is different, every instrument's different, but if it's a surgical instrument, do you pay them an upfront and a royalty? Do you pay them, do you just say you should be happy to see your instrument come to reality and be used on patients? What's the structure that you like to think about for these entrepreneurs, assuming it's a good idea?
So I think perhaps some of the BD&L folks from Alcon here can better answer that. But in short, we do, depending on the maturity of the technology and also obviously what the motivations of the inventor are, I think there's a broad spectrum of methods by which we interact with them.
But it's uncommon to just say, thank you, great idea, we'll help you make it a reality? There's usually some compensation?
It also comes from the source, right? So similarly, we work with hundreds of KOLs around the world, and some of them are already, we have some working agreements with them. And so,
These
like I said, it's really on a case-by-case basis.
Right. Any other add-on?
I would just say it is a good mixture of both. I would say that most of our microsurgical instrumentation, reusable, handheld, those are probably non-reimbursed, but we had always attached the surgeon's name to the product. For some of the more specific things, we'll always go down the licensing path and work in that regard.
So, Angelo, we could turn and ask the same questions about anything that enables or enhances your OCT machine, or its data capturing or storage or AI application to it. When I talk to AI scientists who are at the universities, they say it's really hard to get the attention of the imaging companies. They don't seem to, maybe they're bad ideas, and this is just, but it seems harder to get. So what's your thought about how important these sort of inbound ideas are that make the machine better, the diagnostic better, that apply AI to it, and how should they come into Zeiss? And is it a pathway of a business deal, or is it, thanks, great idea, you should be happy that it's going to be used on patients?
Well, if it's being developed in a university setting, the process for that is pretty clearly set already from a licensing perspective. You said the question, well, it's kind of hard to get into those imaging companies. For a company like ours and our competitors, we can't ignore AI. We just can't. As you saw in the presentation from Zeiss, there was that top row of things that are very close to the device design. That's kind of hard for a university to work on something like that. But they become predecessors, if you want to call it that, to the lower when we start talking about how do we adjust therapies. This is where a conjunction of a university setting, researchers, and industry can really start to work together, because that's going to be a very long path with the FDA. These are medical devices, and anybody can write an algorithm. Last year at the ASRS panel, I said this, and I think the whole room went quiet since Google was on the panel with me. I mean, anybody can write an algorithm. Anybody can run a clinical test and prove an algorithm. Changing the way a practice operates is fundamentally different and takes a lot of effort to understand what's happening in that practice every single day. And the fact that 15 years ago, the doctors made the decision. Today, it's not that. It's the insurance organizations, it's the patient. So there's a big shift on who makes the call, and that's going to be a big influence on how these practices work. And Zeiss invested in technology and cataract surgery and efficiency and data management a couple of years ago, and that is not an easy process to change a practice.
So thank you, Angelo. Christopher, I know drugs perhaps best of all these subsectors, but tell our audience how Genentech Roche thinks about this, and then I'll ask my difficult question.
Okay, so in terms of collaboration, so I think Genentech and Roche is probably slightly more, when you say internally focused, I think probably I'd frame it as we don't jump up and down and sing and dance about our collaborations and our partnerships. So I think we are exceptionally open. So my number one kind of message to everybody is if you've got an innovative product, particularly in retina, but in the next, or outside of retina, front of the eye, we would like to become an ophthalmology company in the future. So please do come to us first. That's kind of our number one message. But in terms of partnerships, we have many partnerships. For example, the port delivery system obviously came from Foresight. We collaborated for many years, far many more years than I've worked at Roche for, before we completely acquired that company. And then looking at our kind of early research organization out of Basel, we've obviously got the collaboration ongoing with Ionis for that complement factor B inhibitor. And some of their platform technologies, we kind of acquired a company called Dutalis a number of years ago, which is looking at creating basically a kind of a fragment-sized bispecific molecules, which are very stable. So we are very keen on collaborations, and we do recognize that we are definitely not sourcing all the innovation internally.
Have you disclosed what percentage of Genentech Roche innovation is external?
I don't think we've declared it publicly, but it feels, as I was thinking through it, feels like about 50-50 in terms of getting it forward. So, I mean, looking at our phase 3 trials, we've got the faricimab, which was internal, PDS is external. And actually, interestingly, I was just thinking through, so the lampalizumab, although the drug didn't actually work, we actually found that molecule through a collaboration from many years ago. It underwent some iterative improvements, but it was actually from a different company.
So many of the small companies in the audience will have this experience, not just with Genentech Roche, but with many of the drug companies, that they'll have an interesting molecule, a great target, animal models that show best-in-class, potentially for best-in-class, or equal to best-in-class with better delivery. And they go to the big companies and say, fascinating, show us in a dog. Great, do a non-human primate. That's wonderful. Would love to see the dose escalation in humans. There's sort of this slow creep to where you really want to take it, which is phase 2 proof of concept, and then run with it. So you want it virtually de-risked. How can you help those young entrepreneurs not be so frustrated? Or is there some advice to them about how to approach companies better, how to get traction? Are there structures where they can actually partner early with companies like yours?
Sure. So I think so the answer is yes, and I think this is a lot about building up the relationships. I think that there's, I've taken up this role only in the last 9 months, but I think if you go, for many of you who have been to JP Morgan, it feels like it's a relationship game. Get to know us, and we'll bring our scientists in, and we'll have that discussion, and we'll be pretty transparent in those discussions. What we like about the molecule, what we don't like about the molecule, what we expect to see in the next 6 to 12 months, and how we could get there. Hopefully, for those of you in the audience who've had these discussions, I'm being relatively accurate, and you didn't leave feeling really angry with us. But I think that's how we'd like to do it. And I think the second thing I'd say is probably we are open to early collaborations, and sometimes I think which is why the relationship is so important, is that there's a big trust piece. So sometimes in collaborations we might want to take the smaller company's platform, bring it in, and just do some of the tests ourselves. And there will be a partnership process where we'd have to go through that. So you'll have to trust us, we'll have to trust you, and sometimes you can put that in a contract, but ultimately we have to trust each other.
Good. I want to turn to ex-US, and there I mean mostly Asia, China more than any other, and Europe. How do you think about those regions for sources of innovation, importance for doing trials, devices or drugs, and ultimately commercialization? Are they exploding? Are they only modest and secondary importance? So innovation, sources of clinical research, centers for doing these trials, and then commercially, how important are they? So we'll start down with Ravi, and we'll come on through.
So I think one of the big challenges today, especially in some of the emerging markets, is really the need for more retinal surgeons, right? And I'm only talking about retina. In India, for example, I understand it's around 800 retinal surgeons for a population of over 1.2, 1.3 billion people, right? So there's really a huge need in terms of further education, and I think the community as a whole plays a role, and private companies certainly have a role in that as well. So I think the population bases are large. By 2025, according to some estimates, it'll be over 500 million people with diabetes, and so the needs are huge. And so I think that's an area where innovation is really going to be critical. I think some of the precursors, some of the technologies we talked about this afternoon, like artificial intelligence, I think will be amazingly helpful. But then it really kind of comes down to, okay, if there's a problem that's identified, how are we going to solve it? And I think the community as a whole has to figure out how
I think I heard what you say is it's mostly a commercial opportunity. Obviously, it's an unmet need, and hence it's a commercial opportunity to address that unmet need. Speaking from a business perspective.
Well, it's a human need, right?
Yes, I understand. Obviously, but you have a business, and you focus on, I presume, building the business.
I think everybody is part of the solution, and I think companies certainly will be a part of that solution.
How?
I think it really kind of comes down to meaningful innovation, right? So some of the technologies that are geared towards premier markets, where there's a lot greater reimbursement, those are obviously not going to resonate.
More cost-effective innovation.
Right. So really cost-effective innovation.
Thank you. Angelo?
Well, if you want to talk about Asia, it's really China, maybe Korea, maybe Japan, and after that, you got something in Singapore. There is innovation. My worry with, if I look at Asia specifically with China, is I see the walls going up, and it's getting harder and harder to bring product in, and I think it's going to get harder and harder to get product out. There's innovation there. There's a lot of investment, especially in AI. Will it be developed and commercialized? That's a big question mark. The other thing you got to overlay on this that we're not talking about, especially when we talk about Europe, is the change to MDR on the device side. What's going to happen? That's going to affect Asia. I think it could be 10 years from now. It's easier to get a product done in the United States than anywhere else in the world because the walls are going up. So this is going to impact the cycle of innovation. And best definition I've ever seen of innovation is innovation equals idea plus execution. Lots of great ideas. You got to be able to execute them. All that goes into commercialization and development. That's the key challenge.
One just quick follow-on. AI in China is white hot, as you alluded to.
White hot.
Are they beating us? Are they going to AI us to death?
The interesting thing is when I've met with the companies in China on AI, because of course we're very interested in having China-specific solutions for China in China, because I think that's the only way you're going to win there. They've got, again, a lot of ideas, but they don't know how to move from the idea to the commercialization. They really struggle. That's where they look to companies like us to say, okay, how do we monetize this? And the challenge is, as an independent company, and there's a pretty important AI company right now that's going through a liquidation sale out of Europe, if they don't get there, they just got to get out. The investors walk. And I think the hype curve, I'm very worried about the hype curve in AI right now in our space.
Great. Chuck?
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, we look to outside the U.S. Very routinely for innovation. In fact, in Europe, we do a lot of harvesting of ideas and technologies and companies that we're looking at very heavily, to bring those technologies in. I think the medical device regulations are going to probably stifle some of that innovation. I think, some of the smaller companies, it's going to be, incredibly difficult for them to really comply to those regulations and really survive so that they can bring innovation to the industry. So I think there's going to be a challenge for the Europeans. I think, we're going to continue to look to U.S. I think, our FDA reforms are really headed in the right direction. And I think Asia is really a gold mine for opportunities to learn about these new innovative technologies. So we continue to look outside the U.S. for ideas and technologies we can bring to the market.
Christopher?
Yeah, so very briefly, I think, Asia, exceptionally important market for us. And I think in terms of specifically innovation, so I'd echo what we've just heard about on the panel is the AI is very hot there. So we do have business development partners over in China talking to some of these smaller biotechs. Nothing's kind of materialized yet in terms of that, but there is growing and increasingly potentially important innovation in China. Development, again, I think we heard earlier on, you have to have studies in China and Japan, so we will continue to kind of have sub-studies in terms of speeding up access for patients so that we can have one single phase 3 program rather than having multiple phase 3 programs in the Far East. And I think we've seen in the last 2-3 years more focused on our oncology world that China is a really rapidly growing market, and they're really opening it up to products from other countries and companies. So I think I'd hope that this will continue to change over the next 10 years, certainly.
So I'm going to take Chair's prerogative and take 60 seconds. I'd like each of you to answer either not so much, somewhat, or it's a big deal. And that is, if you're looking at a hot US-based company in phase 3, past proof of concept, that has licensed their technology or their drug to China, so you cannot have access to China rights, but you like it, and the question of acquiring or partnering with this company comes up, is the fact that you no longer have access to China rights not a big deal, somewhat, or it's a really big deal? So.
Not a big deal.
I think it's not a big deal to somewhat.
Somewhat.
Huge deal.
I would say somewhat.
Okay, great. On that note, I'd like to thank my audience and my panelists. Thank you.